welcome to another episode of the Talent Game podcast. I'm your host, Joe Burridge, and with me today is Vanessa Mullin. Hello, Vanessa. Welcome.
Hi there.
Hello.
You're being
Hey.
here.
Yeah, well, I'm very glad to have you on. Been wanting that to happen for a while, so it's good to see you. But for everyone else who has no idea who you are, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, and let me make sure that it comes across right. Obviously, I've been in my new job for nearly 1 month. So I'm still working on my pitch for myself. But so my name is Vanessa Mullin. I'm currently Vice President of Sales at Scenario. So we're an AI generative asset production company for game-ready assets, marketing assets, and anything in between. Being able to control your workflows really precisely and get visuals ready for your game and beyond. Before that, I've been in the gaming space, I think I want to say 7 years now, something along those lines. I've worked in game audio, so competitive player to VBox, which most people are familiar with, at Agora for a few years. Prior to that, I was at a startup called Didimo that focused on digital human creation. And then previous to that, I was at Unity for 3 years. So a background in games, a lot more before that, non-gaming, but we can start there.
Yeah, that's awesome. And also, Scenario are part of the Play Ventures portfolio as well. And have to say that, so we got to know each other because, well, you threw your name into the Play Ventures talent network, and I go through that like every week or every other week. And I saw your profile come up, and I was like, "Oh my goodness, I have to speak to that person." So if any recruiters are listening, they'll know this feeling of when you have a conversation with someone, you're like, oh my goodness, they are just perfect for that role in the company that you're working on, which is always such a great feeling. So anyway, that's how we got started.
I can tell you, as a candidate as well, the feeling is mutual because you, especially if you do put yourself as open to work on LinkedIn, if you have been in a certain industry for a certain number of years, and if you are a woman, especially, I think when jobs like this come up, you don't get a lot of inbound for higher level roles, to be honest. And speaking to you, I believe there were 3 that you put forward, and I think I may have even said, I don't know if they'll even want to talk to me, which is crazy. But you sort of pushed me and were like, go on and see what you say and see how you feel. And I think that was a really great move by you because I had almost talked myself out of the room before I was in it, which is so silly.
Oh, the number was much higher than 3 as well. You were very much the standout. So I'm so pleased it's gone from that into now you joining Scenario, and then you've only been weeks into onboarding, and this such an exciting time. Also, I think I'm really excited about Scenarios just as a product. It's really fascinating to see Gen AI, first of all, starting out as like a taboo topic within the games industry to now being like, oh, okay, people getting their head around how the tool can really benefit artists and devs and creators instead of, hindering or taking jobs and all these sorts of like rather interesting takes.
I was very bold, and in the first week that I was on the company payroll, I signed up to be at a panel at PGC with our competitors, and I think I'd only been doing the job 3 days, and it was kind of a baptism by fire to be up there and to have to really be on it. But also good to see the sentiment. Like you said, like I came into this job knowing that there were apprehensions about AI, but one of the first things I did on the panel was just ask the audience how many people were exploring AI in their workflows. And I would say at least 70% of the room, and the room was packed, 70% were, which I thought was much higher than when I had first joined. I thought people were still a lot more weary of it, but there's a lot going on. It's very exciting. And I have never worked for a company in a sales job where you get so much inbound. Every other job I've ever worked, outbounding is tooth and nail every day, hundreds of emails, hundreds of calls. I have a lot of inbound here, and I think that just speaks volumes to people's desire to understand AI and to explore it more, which I think there is a misconception there, or there was before. So very cool.
Yeah. And I think you touched on a good point there, that the reality is that in agreement with you, the majority of people in leadership positions, people making decisions about what tools should we look into, invest in game studios and games companies, these people are really, really interested because of the potential of either making the same quality games, more of them, or with like breaking into smaller teams and iterating faster, or even just making with the same size team an even bigger game. Like, these are a lot of the promises of Gen AI tools, right? So why would people not want to do that, right?
Yeah. So my biggest fear joining was that people thought that the companies producing platforms like this would be taking jobs, whereas it's very clear, the more that you understand the product, that it's just helping artists create art and iterate on the art that they've already created. So there is no, you're going to reduce your team size by this much and save X amount. Like, no teams that we're working with right now are reducing costs or reducing jobs based on implementing us. They're just working faster.
Yeah.
So no, cool.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Awesome. And hey, talking about games, and switching gears slightly, I'd love to know, what are you playing right now?
We've talked many times before about how I have a toddler, and I don't get a lot of time to sit and play, I would say, longer style games. But have you ever heard of Dressed? Do you know the company Dressed?
Not off the top of my head, no.
So it is founded by a woman who is an ex-editor in Vogue and Harper's Bazaar, Lucy, and they have a very large presence in London now. I actually started working with them when I was at Unity 4 or 5 years ago, when they were just kicking off. So they're funded by Farfetch, which is one of the biggest sort of back-end fashion tech providers that are out there. And it's basically a partnership between high fashion and gaming. So it's like a style game. So you go in and you pay for your dress dollars, or you earn them based on challenges, and you get to see all of the new high fashion catalogs that are coming out for the season. So they work with Gucci and Prada and all of the big names, and you can actually kind of click to buy as well. So if you see an item and you've styled it and you like it, you can go in and say, "Oh, I like that bag," and there's a link to go purchase, which I do not do, but I love the styling aspect. And recently I won a competition through the game, and I got to go to the London Fashion Awards with Dressed. Wow. And like go to the VIP party, and I got to see Blondie was performing, which was really cool. And yeah, it was amazing. So I'm extra sweet on them because they obviously sent me to a really cool event, but it's super fun and just relaxing. I don't have time for like RPG at the moment. There's no space in the house for any of that. So
I totally get you. It is interesting, when naturally if you're a gamer, then you have like kids or something else comes into your life that diminishes your free time, then it's like, oh well, maybe I'll dabble in mobile in these newer areas that I can get a lot of joy from, these smaller game sessions. That's really fascinating, actually. Digital fashion blending into games. But been keeping an eye on that for a while, especially because I did a lot of work with the MetaHuman team while I was at Epic. And actually seeing the fashion industry really embrace that digital 3D side has been pretty fascinating. So
it was one of the teams that I worked on when I was at Unity. So that's how I came to know Dressed, because I started working in gaming and then I moved over to media and entertainment. And so much of what they wanted was fabric. So the fit and the flow of fabric in any 3D space. And it was really hard. Dressed right now is just 2D, but you can see there's a lot of experimenting, especially on LinkedIn. If you follow any of the top creators, it's getting so much better. And the realism is really getting there. When I was at Unity, the big challenge to tackle was fur. And there were a lot of demos coming out trying to perfect hair and to perfect fur. So fabric is the new fur, if you will.
Flashbacks actually. Before Epic, I was at EA hiring for the Frostbite team.
Yeah.
I was I worked really closely with the physics team. So before I got into the games industry, I had no idea that like cloth physics was a challenge and people were really passionate about that. So like I joined
by explaining it to my husband who still doesn't really know what I do, and being like, I spent my whole day talking about the flow of fabric on a 3D runway, and he's like, all right. And no, it was so deep. It's very difficult.
Yeah. Well, the same thing. I'll show my wife and be like, wow, look at this cape. Look how that moves. That's incredible. And she'd be like, okay. Yeah. No, I think that's great parallels in there. So thanks for that. And so you mentioned in your intro, and you mentioned just then about life before games and getting into it. So how did you get into the games industry?
So I'm an English major. So if we go all the way back to 15 years ago, I was studying English and graduated uni and moved to London. I ended up working for a travel company, an amazing company called G Adventures. If anyone out there works in games but also likes to travel, incredible like small group adventure tours all around the world. And I was there for I think about 5 years, and it was a sales job. So again, worked on commission, all about understanding the product, understanding the people. But the best perk of that job was I got to take one trip anywhere in the world a year.
Wow.
Yeah. So I got to do a lot of really, really cool things. I went to India and South America and the Antarctic and the Arctic, and have been in the water at both poles. And so I did that for many, many years. But I hit a ceiling where I realized, yes, I could keep taking these trips and it would be great because they're free. But the talent or the travel industry, the salaries aren't exactly the sexiest, and you kind of have to either live and die by being able to take free travel, or I thought, what if I got into something else where the variability in pay was a bit better, and then I could just travel when I wanted and not have to wait for a free trip, and have to travel with strangers. So I moved from leisure travel into corporate travel. So I started working with tech companies to help them book their international travel conferences. So I was working with my biggest client when I was in London was Revolut when they first got started. So I was able to sign them and kind of got a taste again for, these people, they also get to travel all over the world and their company also pays for it. But they have these really cool, really interesting jobs. So the first tech job I ever applied for was at Revolut, which was pre-Unity, I think. But I got scouted by a wonderful recruiter named Corin, who is still at Unity now, who contacted me and just wanted to get to know what I was all about because they were expanding the Brighton team. And I think that they just wanted someone different. There was a lot of entry-level tech experience, but this was more about people, selling to companies and being personable, and less about tech background and more about, I guess, the humanity side of sales. So Corin introduced me to the manager, and I was one of the first 4 on the inside sales team out of Brighton. And I think when I left, we grew to about 25. So was there quite a while, but I had never really intended, if you look back on when I went to school and I thought I was going to grow up and write a book or work at a magazine, working in tech was never my goal. I actually didn't even know who Unity was. And when I looked up their website, had to call my brother and ask him, like, is this a good job? Should I take this? And he was like, oh my God, holy shit. Yes, you should talk to these people. And I mean, my brother has a full sleeve of Nintendo on one arm and a full sleeve of Ocarina of Time on the other. So he very much understood why it was a good job to consider. And the rest is history. I just kind of had to learn the ropes. I think selling is a skill, but you can learn any industry if you really put your nose down and get to know the culture and get to know the technology and the languages that they speak in terms of artists versus developers. So it took a lot of personal work to be convincing, especially to developers, that this girl with no games background can understand their needs. But we got there, and I would like to think, 7 or 8 years later, people take me seriously now. So it's been a journey.
Yeah, and shout out to Corin for a great
still there, still doing great work, Corin.
And also your brother. I mean, it's slightly out of shot, and also this is an audio podcast. So, but I've got Ocarina of Time in my N64 just off to the side.
That's what his sleeve is, and it is. I'll send you photos after this. It is stunning, really beautiful, and so well done. He was in a magazine for it, so there's official photos in it.
Well, kudos to your brother as well for recognizing that Unity is a great company and for you going to say.
I think he would have also taken a job there had he been offered. So, but he's at PagerDuty now. He's at another tech company based out of the States. So,
there you go.
Kind of back end op stuff. So, tech is in the family.
Yeah. Wow. So like me, you graduated in one of the humanities subjects. How's philosophy? And
very useful in your day-to-day life, of course.
I always say there weren't a lot of philosopher jobs going, so I'm like, you know what? There's
there's going to be a market for it one day, and you'll be ready.
Yeah, I just got to have a grey beard, and then I'll be good to go. But that's fantastic, and I this is why I ask everybody who comes on the podcast, like, how did you get into the games industry? Because so far everybody has their own story, and also it proves every time that how it's a diverse in terms of backgrounds and experiences the games industry has, and it's you can really bring a lot and a fresh take into that, and that's what I was saying. Hats off to Unity and the recruiter and everyone else that hired you there to understand, okay, what are the core values and traits that we're looking for in this new role? And great, we can pull someone from outside of games into this. And I'm very much an advocate of that, because really good things can happen, as Exhibit A, Vanessa Mullin is exhibiting right now. Cool. So, I guess in terms of, I think a good thing to go from here would be onto something along the lines of culture, because you moved from Canada over to the UK. You came from a completely different industry of travel, very much a physical thing, into the world of games, software, things what was your experience being of the culture of the games industry in contrast, and also perhaps even just that initial onboarding into Unity, if you can recall back then, how have those differences been?
Well, it was, I don't think I really understood how different the two worlds were until I walked into the Unity office for the first time in Brighton, because the travel industry is just so incredibly different. But going into Unity and seeing just the sheer amount of developers and programmers and artists that exist within those roles, whereas most of the travel industry is either operations or sales and marketing, and that's it. And to come into an office that in Brighton at the time, it was 5 floors, and then we were just 4 salespeople, and the rest of it was the smartest people that I've ever worked with in my entire life. And you do feel a bit like an imposter. You're like, I know they look at me and think, just another salesperson. And I'm like, you guys are so cool. Tell me what you're working on. So it took me aback, because I'm used to kind of being, in any other company, sales is the most important role to keep things ticking over. But a company like Unity, yes, sales is important, but the tech behind the scenes is what make or breaks every day. So it was a really interesting kind of flip. And then again, I think in my first week, we had to design a game in Unity, which mine never went to production. It started and ended, I think, on day 1. I made it very clear to them, I'm not going to be your most technical salesperson. I can get my way through it. But I've always worked with who I would consider the most incredible sales engineers. And I was really lucky at Unity that I actually had a team of gals. So it was me who was kind of like the lead sales, and then a girl named Sam Roach, who was my sales engineer, and Rhiannon, who was my SDR. And it always used to throw studios off because they always assumed Sam was a man. And then we'd get on this call with this room full of generally male developers, and they would be like, "Oh, women? That's interesting. That's cool." But we rocked, and we were a great little squad. And Sam is actually still at Unity. So when I was there, she started as the sales engineer, and now she is the director of sales engineering for all of Europe. So she would be great on your podcast as well, because she has just done an amazing trajectory with her career, and it's been so wonderful to watch, not even being there anymore. The type of growth that is possible.
Definitely.
But yeah, it was definitely a change of pace from my previous role. Changed more, of course, when the pandemic hit, and obviously we were all in office for my first few years at Unity, and then 2020 having to learn how to work remote. And during the pandemic, I also switched roles. So I had my son in 2020, and unfortunately at that time, Unity was making a call back to office, and I learned whilst I was working from home remotely, that I just really thrived in that environment. I loved being able to be present at home and to be there with my son, but also to be able to do what I love. So I made a difficult decision to leave Unity, which a lot of people thought was insane, because it was a very cushy job and super fun. But I really didn't want to give up that balance that I felt like I had working remotely. And so I took a risk and joined a startup, a very, very scrappy startup, who were still running and still doing amazing things. But yeah, I've learned a lot along the way about the type of company that I know I need to work for, and the type of leadership that drives me in a way that I know I can be successful, in a type of product, and where in the stage the product is for me to be the most successful in helping them go to market. So it has been a very interesting few years, learning all of those things about myself.
Yeah, there's just from that one overview alone, there's a few paths that could take this conversation. Like you mentioned, like an all-women sales team within within a male-dominated industry, which is the video games industry, or even just remote working. And the other part about being in a sales, let's say a commercial role within a product company like Unity, like being in recruiting, can definitely relate to that. And but in my experience coming to games the first time at EA, I would love spending more time with the game devs and the engineers. I felt like I had way more perhaps in common, or way more interested in what they were doing than I mean, if anyone in my previous HR team at EA hears this, I'm not saying they're boring. I'm just saying that I loved chatting to the game devs. I had more interest in what game devs were doing than what HR was doing.
Absolutely.
So I'd love spending time on the floor there. But you're right. Like I'm like, I don't make anything. I don't make anything. I just hire the people that make the things. So
I have always said, if I'm the smartest person in the room, there is probably a problem. I should not be. I prefer to be surrounded by the people who are building, the cool shit. And I can just, I help them find the right tools to build it. But I'm not, if you think that it's me that's the smartest person in the room, we've got the wrong audience. So
yeah. Well, one thing I'd love to I would, am I right in thinking you're an extroverted person?
No, absolutely not. 100% an introvert. Would choose, but absolutely why I love working from home. My husband laughs at me because I would gladly stay inside all day like a hermit, but I had chosen a job that is so outside of my preferred lifestyle. So I love sales, and I love selling, but at the end of the day, when it's 5 o'clock, that social battery is done. And I will turn off. But I turn it on for the job.
Yeah, I've throughout my career I've worked with. I think recruiting is sales. I often think of it as
oh
sales.
God, yeah, it is. You're selling people.
Yeah,
not in a bad way, but
yeah, legally selling people. But some of the best recruiters I've worked with are both being extroverts and introverts, and I think that's a very common misconception about any people relations or sales types of roles. Yeah. Oh yeah, you need to be extroverted. It's just like, no, the extroversion introversion scale is just where do you recharge your batteries? Yeah. Is kind of see it. It's like yeah.
And I think when you work with, like, my main audience is developers or artists or people who are usually head down, being quiet, exploring technology. Like, you need to sort of understand that side of things, because you can't sell to developers in a extremely extroverted way. You have to know how to be calm and concise and to read the room. So I think having that balance is important, because every audience requires a different level of enthusiasm, and I can kind of use that to match.
Yeah, and that all so yeah, you highlighted the point that you were in like an all women team, and you made that point because obviously that must be a rare thing to have. It's like, how do you think that came about, and how was it? How was it an advantage as well? Like, if you think, I think what I'm trying to get at is that I would love to know your experience of that, because it's like, if anyone's listening who's only ever been in these male teams and things like that, like what would actually injecting some diversity of experiences into a team benefit? Yeah.
Well, for us, it started out, it was myself and three guys on the team, and then all of the sales engineers were guys as well, men. And I was given the opportunity to help run an interview when one of the leaders had stepped out for the day or wasn't in the office. So I wasn't supposed to be interviewing Sam. And weirdly, the person who interviewed her with me was our legal counsel, Rhiannon. So it was almost like they had nobody had turned up. So we'd gone in and interviewed her. And I'm not sure how the situation would have played out differently had we not interviewed her first. But I remember coming out and being like, she's quiet, but she's smart. And she could bring exactly what I think that we need to the team. And she was the first female sales engineer that they hired on the team, I believe, as well. And it was kind of just happenstance that I was able to really advocate to want her to work on my vertical, because I loved the idea of going into these calls and people always assuming that they wouldn't speak to a team of women that were handling all aspects of the process, from sales to outreach to engineering. And yeah, sometimes I wish that we had recorded the calls, because some of those initial snippets when you would jump on the call would be so weirdly shocked that, there were no men in the room on our side. And the amount of time people made a point to say it was quite strange. But I mean,
in a positive way or not?
I think there were times it could go either, but I would say more often than not, the reception was positive, especially as I think they sort of discounted us when we would turn on the call and then speak to us for 5 minutes and be like, oh, wait a minute. These girls know their shit. They know what they're talking about. Because there was this whole, and I think the wave is coming again, this idea of like being a diversity hire. And, did you earn your space, or were you hired to fill a quota? And there was always this imposter syndrome feeling of like, no, we belong here. And if you look at the other teams and, how they are performing, we communicated really well with each other. There was never any competitive nature. It was just like, how could we work together to make our targets? And we always knocked it out of the park. It was one of the hardest things to leave was my my little partnership with Sam, because she was just like the dream sales engineer. And I think we were both very introverted. Like, you wouldn't really catch us at a work party event in the late hours. But we just had the same style and vibe in our sales calls, and it just really worked. And I have worked with male sales engineers, of course. And I don't know. No, there's a different feeling. There's just, I think when two women are in a field where it's normally male dominated, it's just like a sisterhood, and you're like, we got this, and we earned this, and no, it was interesting and it was super fun.
Yeah. I talk about microcultures or subcultures a lot. Like, let's take Unity. Unity would have a culture, and then the sales would have one, and then your own, that trio or duo, you would have your own microculture there. But just having like-minded people that you work with day in, day out, get to the point where you truly understand each other. I think pretty powerful. And also, like when it comes to hiring, you hire the best person possible. But if you are not introducing a variety of people into that hiring process, then you miss stuff. If you have a really undiverse interview panel, like that it's just a case of they're not going to catch the strengths of others, and so it is at a detriment. So anyway, I thought that was pretty fascinating. So
at the company that I used to work for, the travel company G Adventures, the last round interview was called the culture fit, and they actually held it in a ball pit in the middle of the office. And they had this wheel. You'd have to sit in the ball pit, and they'd spin this wheel of questions, and you'd have to answer these very random questions. And you would be surprised how many people don't get hired just because of a culture fit, because it is really an important driver, especially in a sales role. But it was an interesting, like, social experiment at the end. And these were questions like, what's your favorite toe, or something silly like that just to try to get them to think differently. But I know that, tech recruiting does it different now than obviously travel used to. The idea is the same.
So are you saying that, I guess, one, are you saying that was a good part of the interview process? And if so, two, what was that stage looking for? Because I guess I'm just always fascinated about interview processes and the purpose of these things. So
I think I would say like 95% of the time it was positive. But I know a few people who interviewed and twice got pushed out at the culture fit, who were eventually hired and ended up, they're still at the company now, like 8 years later. Because there are people who are very introverted, who in that situation, no matter how comfortable they feel, are just not silly or that type of person. So it can be very limiting, depending on the job type that you're hiring for. So there were definitely a few good hires who were missed. But I think it's also interesting. It's nice to push people outside of their comfort zone and just see, especially I think for sales roles, like you need to be able to think on the spot, and you need to be able to mirror other people's emotions in certain times. And in that way, like psychologically, it's an interesting experiment. Would I recommend it for the tech industry? Probably not. I could see a lot of people not wanting to work for a company who would throw them in a ball pit and make them spin a magic wheel. But for me, it worked out because I did. But yeah, it was I think an interesting way to better understand someone's personality and also spot red flags. Like there were a few people who said some questionable things that they thought were funny in the culture fit interview that you think, oh, I'm glad we pulled that out of you. Absolutely not. Thank you for coming. So yeah, an interesting way to kind of catch people off guard as well. And you get to know how much of it they're putting on for show.
Yeah, a way to peel back a layer. Yeah, like what I used to love before I joined a company called EA, worked at sports analytics startup called Huddle, and the final interview would always include taking a candidate for lunch, and that was an interview stage. Like everyone I'd be like, okay, make sure you get your feedback, type up your feedback after the lunch interview. We wouldn't tell the candidate it was a lunch interview. We're just going to lunch. But the candidate should always know that they're being assessed at every single moment. So, go for food, you let your guard down a bit, you say some things that are really on your mind, and then it's like, some those things could be like great, like we can see you're relaxed and transparent, and that really aligns with our values and what we're looking for in this role. And then you can have the vice versa happen as well.
And I think that is one of the things that makes hiring in a remote setting very difficult, because you kind of just have that locked framework of 1 hour where you meet someone and they can really turn it on for the hours that they're in the call. And then the more that you get to know them after the hiring process, I mean, it could go one way or the other in terms of figuring out, how much you really got to know them or how, so I think that makes remote hiring very difficult, and you have to be quite careful. And I mean, I feel very lucky that in this interview process, at least for a scenario, the founders and I think we spoke more about personal life really for the first half of the interviews than we did even about approaching, technology and how I could help the company. And that for me was a major green flag, being able to really understand who they were and who I was, and see if, our values fit well enough that we could work together. So a very different interview process than I'm used to.
Yeah. And actually, so you're in a startup now, like we mentioned, but obviously Unity, very large company. Imagine when you left, 6,000, 7,000, something like that.
Yeah, it was the peak time for.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I say it was around, it's coming towards the end of 2021. So yeah. But since then you've been in startups. Right. So what has drawn you towards startups and smaller companies? What do they have that bigger companies perhaps don't have?
I mean, to talk about the good things for big companies, I feel like we all know the budgets are there. So you have all of the technology you could ever need to be successful. They have every subscription to every service online that could help you with your workflow or your outbounding or anything really. If you need it, they've got spend for it. But what I found is there's just a general lack of flexibility in how I wanted to approach my sales methods versus what they would like you to do. That's what I found in large corporations. They usually have had a sales team running for long enough that things are kind of set in stone in terms of what they want to see every day from you, or how they want you to approach your work, or how they want you to manage and monitor your day-to-day. And I find that really limiting, because every sales activity or every sales call is very different. And, at Unity, we didn't have a script, but we did have kind of things that we had to approach we were trained on the MEDIC framework. So every sales call you did, you had to go in and lay out your MEDIC data that you had pulled from that call. Whereas when you're at a startup, you kind of have a lot more freedom to work your best way. And I think this is where, when I decided big tech wasn't for me, I kind of felt like I was not butting heads with leadership, but they wanted to see X, Y, Z every day. Sometimes in the sales cycle, bigger things especially take more time. And there will be people who will be turning over small deals every day. But I always focused more on the long tail, big opportunity that I knew would, one, be better for the company, because it would be a large piece recurring revenue, but two, had more legs. And I think just finding that balance, there's not a lot of room for experimentation when you go to a big tech company. And I love that element of, a product is new. How is the best way to sell it? How is the best way to price it? Who is the best audience? What is the best use case? Like, I want to be able to explore that. And working for startups has really given me that opportunity. Dynamo, the digital human company, especially in terms of, their product was not complete yet. So there were a lot of ways that we could have taken it, from digital fashion to video games to metaverse, which was the hype at the time. And I kind of got to explore all of that with them. And now at Scenario, the product is solid. It is ready to go. It is just getting better every week. And it's easy to tell so many different ways in which we could approach different markets. And I'm lucky that Emmanuel and the team really trust me to say, do what you need to do, sell how you need to sell. If the pricing isn't working, change the pricing. If what we're including isn't working, let's iterate on it. And the trust is there with me to allow me to make those decisions. Whereas in previous roles at big companies, it's like, it's this way, or we're going to talk about it in your monthly review over and over again until they see my figures at the end of the year and they're like, oh, wait, you were selling this whole time, right? Yeah. So there's just a lot more trust. And I think I really thrive off that environment of like non-combative trust.
Yeah, I'm laughing because I just fully understand what you mean. A lot of the times, large companies want really, really smart people to do what they're told, ultimately. And startups want really, really smart people to tell them what to do, or at least be like, great, like, you're the sales professional.
Yeah.
Let's hear from you. How should we do this thing?
And there's no wrong way. Like, there are so many people that I know who have come to startups and have been like, oh my God, no, like, there is no structure. There is no, and some people thrive off of that and do really well. And I know salespeople who are still at Unity who are absolutely killing it because they have everything that they need laid out for them to be successful, and they just need to go in and do it. And that is great for them. But for me, I really love the opportunity to just think differently every single day in how I approach a deal, and how I approach how we pitch and how we market. And it's just fun. It allows me to use a lot of the skills that I think I've wanted to use in previous roles, but have been told, this is not a business priority. But it's fun to be able to kind of help drive the business priorities, and you just get that much more freedom when you're working for a startup.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, you're right. Yes, there's tons of great things about being at a large company. Ultimately,
perks, amazing. Yeah. You have so many perks. But with the perks come, So,
but ultimately, I think like what you've done, you've figured out where you work best, what environment you're happiest in, both from a culture perspective and also processes, type of work, and everything else. And you've figured that out, and now you can just hone straight in on that.
Yeah,
which is awesome. Hey, we're coming up to the end of the podcast, so there is a question that I ask everyone at the end, and that question is, what is your favorite interview question? And I realized this bit I'm going to edit out right now. I realized I forgot to tell you that I was going to ask you this question. So I realized as I was asking, I was like, I forgot to tell you that I was going to ask this question, so you haven't had any thinking time to do that. So anyway, everything over the last 30 seconds I've said I'm going to cut out, and it's going to I'm going to say, what's your favorite interview question? And it's just going to seamlessly cut into
they moved to me saying something really profound. What is my favorite interview question? Well, I think I mentioned it earlier when talking about my interviews with Emmanuel and Hervé. Is like, it has nothing to do with the job, but more about the people behind the job. So for me, I just love when people ask me how I got into the industry, because I know it is non-standard. I know if you looked at my LinkedIn, well, now you'd have to go back pretty far, which is nice. But at least previously, if you looked at my LinkedIn or my resume, you would think, why on earth does this girl think that she should work in tech? And I think people will really surprise you, if on face value, my experience doesn't show how interested I am in the industry. But, I grew up playing Atari and N64, and I have spent so much time in the water temple in the Ocarina of Time that it's like, where are the iron boots and why can't I figure out how to shoot the bow and arrow? My brother always had to do it for me. And it's like, there are so many things that people can bring to the table that aren't on their resume. So kind of asking the why behind why the job was interesting is always the fun one for me. And then putting the question back on the interviewers, like there were stories that Emmanuel and Hervé told me about how they got into these jobs and some of their previous roles and their family life that you just think, I want to work with these people because we are very similar. And they're also very funny or they're very cool. So yeah, I mean, I can tell you many questions that I was asked in that spin the wheel ball pit.
No, we'll leave the spin the wheel ball pit. But I do. So, like, the reason why you like that question you asked is because it just allowed you a chance to explain like why you're in the industry, why you're passionate about what you do and everything else. So it was a great question to allow you to open up and tee up all of those answers. And also,
just
like you said,
gives the insight because I think my experience, people didn't really, aside from probably wanting to just move industries, people didn't get the why behind, does she actually care or is she just chasing perks or, you know, what is the feeling behind it? And this is coming from like someone who's played games her whole life. Never did I think when I saw that Unity logo that it was anything other than anything, because you don't, when you're a kid, you don't think about, you know, unless my brother has always been a developer, so he kind of course he knew that, but looking at it from a sales perspective, I never would have put the engine behind it's interesting. Yeah,
it is interesting. And yeah, I've said this so many times, but not once did the idea cross my mind when I was thinking about even what subject to study at university. No one was like, hey, Joe, you spend the vast majority of your time, free time, playing video games. Why don't you look into something like that? And no one suggested it. Thought didn't even cross my mind. So
I don't know if I even considered it a job when I thought about all of the things I could study. I thought, oh, I like writing. Surely I will write a book one day, because that is the best way to, whether it's not.
Yeah. That's pretty much how I chose my degree as well. But hey, Vanessa, we are at the end. I just want to say thanks so much. I really, really enjoyed going through all of that and just hearing your thoughts on things like culture and going into the world of video games and going from corporate into startups and all of these lessons along the way. So thanks so much. Thoroughly enjoyed the chat. And well, we'll definitely be continuing to work with you now. Really in the portfolio. So
all right. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye-bye.